to the cloud. So last week was a sort of aberration, right? We did this deep dive on the meaning of Halach as an attempt to try to give people a little bit of a sense of sort of how Talmud study might work or might happen in a more sort of traditional kind of sense. And now we're going to go back to the context. But just to sort of remind ourselves, remember we were really into Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi Chia had two things, and we weren't quite sure exactly how they fit. But in any event, Rabbi Chia was utilizing the law of our Mishnah again, and the weird part of our Mishnah is not only that they split the garment, but that they have to take an oath, and a little bit later on today, we'll finally get to the nature of that oath. But what Rabbi Chia does a couple of things. So the first thing Rabbi Chia attempted to do was to compare the case of our Mishnah, the case of the talus, right? Two people holding onto the talus. We don't know who gets it, and therefore they split and swear. So Rabbi Chia introduced us to the modeh b'miktzat ha'ta'ana case, right? The claim when a person is accused of owing 100. And the person says, it's true that I owe, but I only owe 50. And that case is a case in which, according to the rabbis, the Torah says that you impose an oath on the other 50. And in relation to that case, Rabbi Chia initially says that we should also imagine a similar case in which a person says, the claimant says, you owe me $100, and the defendant says, I don't owe you anything, but there are witnesses that the defendant owes 50, and that case is very much comparable to the modeh b'miktzat ha'ta'ana case, to the partial admission case, and that therefore the oath should also be imposed. Now, at that point, if you recall, the Talmud said, well, maybe that's not really what Rabbi Chia was talking about. Maybe he was talking about the Halach case. But now the Talmud is going to sort of go back to the first case and probe it a little bit more. And that's where we're going to pick up the discussion. And the discussion will pick up with story time. All right, so now that I've shared my screen, anybody have any questions before I dive in?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, feel free to interrupt me. Not that you need permission to do so. You all interrupt me wonderfully. Like I sometimes tell my students, I've read my teacher evaluations, and every time they note that an avenue for growth is that I interrupt people, right? But that's, in my mind, it's because I'm a New York Jew, right? And my interrupting you is how I demonstrate to you that I'm listening to what it is that you're telling me. How would you know that I'm listening if I didn't interrupt you? I'll let you finish, but I just have anyway. So now I've decided to my end around, since it's unlikely that I'm really going to change this about myself. I now say it to begin with, that they shouldn't be offended. We'll see how that works. So, okay. So hahu raya dahavu masrele kol yoma chiyuta bisahade. So there was a raya. A raya is a shepherd, and as we'll see in a second, this image of the shepherd is an interesting one in rabbinic literature. If we were to poll biblical literature, I think our image of the shepherd is a good one. Think of the 23rd Psalm. You wouldn't compare God to a shepherd if being a shepherd was bad, right? Shepherd is great. That's the whole point. God takes care of me, leads me here and there, and even though I'm dying, it's okay because God's with me, the shepherd. Right? Moshe is a shepherd. David HaMelech is a shepherd. The Bible thinks shepherds are great. Well, by the time we get to the Talmud, and Jewish communities are no longer in living memory of nomadic sheep herding, being a shepherd is a bad profession. And shepherds are not to be trusted because what do shepherds do? They lead their flocks to graze in other people's property, thereby stealing their grass. That's what they do. And so shepherds are maybe not to be trusted a little bit. This is I've never quite understood where this transition happens or exactly what it means, but it's just, whereas the Bible tends to think of shepherds as a good thing, Talmud thinks shepherds are a bad thing. Okay, so anytime you hear a shepherd story, we have to know that we have to be immediately suspicious. It's like a shepherd is like the used car salesman of the ancient world or something, right? That everybody's suspicious of, even though you need shepherds in the way you need used car salesmen or something like that. Okay, so this shepherd every day, kol yoma, the people would give this shepherd their chiyuta, their life, literally, but meaning their cows, their animals, bisahade, with witnesses. Okay, and so therefore this shepherd is essentially a paid shomer. Okay? He's paid, he's a dog walker, right, or something, but they did it with witnesses. Why would they do it with witnesses? Because lest the shepherd come back at the end of the day and say, well, what cows? I never saw any cows, right? You could produce the witnesses. No, Bickart lent the shepherd, 4 cows and needs to get his cows back. Okay. Yom Achad, one day, Masrule below Sahade. One day they transmitted their flocks to the shepherd without witnesses. Okay, we know exactly what's going to happen. Lasof, at the end of the day, Amar Laho, he said to them, Lo hayu devarim ma'olam. These things never happened, right? You didn't give me any cows. Okay, exactly as we would suspect a shepherd to ask. Okay. Now, Atu Sahade, and witnesses came, Ashidube, and they testified against him, to Achal Tarte Minaihu, that he ate 2 of them. Okay. So presumably, at least from the grammar, 2 of them, Minaihu, means that initially the claimant is claiming more than 2, right? But the witnesses only seem to have seen or only able to testify about 2. Now, presumably, these witnesses didn't see the initial transfer of the cows to the shepherd. Now, achal doesn't have to mean literal eating. It can mean consumed, right? Made use of them, something like that. But let's make it simple, right? Let's say the witnesses came upon the shepherd, right, making a big barbecue. And let's not make it cows because that would be ridiculous, but sheep, okay, so you have enough people over, having a full sheep is not a crazy idea. And so we have essentially this partial, you can see now how this is sort of close to Rabbi Chia's initial claim. I have one person who says you owe me something. In this sense, it's you owe me my cows back. The other person says, I'd never seen you before in my life, right? I have no idea. I totally denied the claim. And if we had someone totally denying the claim, unlike the modeh b'miktzat hatana, the partial admission of the claim, if we have no witnesses and one person's word against the other person's word, then nobody pays and nobody swears. Okay, but the fact that there are witnesses here, therefore he should have to pay back those 2 that we have the witnesses for, and according to Rabbi Chia, take an oath on the rest, that the partial testimony of the witnesses should be parallel to the partial admission, such that you should have to take the oath on the rest. Okay, and that's why we're telling this silly story. Okay, so Amar Rabbi Zera says about this case, Im ita l'Rebbi Chia kamaita, if the first comparison claim of Rabbi Chia really were to obtain, mishtaba asha'ara, he should swear on the rest. And you can see grammatically it's a little bit strange, right? But you see shin, bet, ayin, sheva, right? Ani nishbati lahashbia. Okay, that's the oath word. Sha'ara, sha'ar in Aramaic is just like sha'ar in Hebrew. He should swear on the rest. We don't know exactly how many cows or sheep or whatever, because it didn't say. But from the context, we understand that we have witnesses about 2, but there's more in that claim. So Rabbi Zera says about this famous case of the shepherd, if Rabbi Chia was right, then this should apply to this case. Okay? And one thing that we really do see in Talmudic times, which does not seem to be the case so much in Mishnaic times, is that Jews seem to go to the rabbis for judgment. Right? The Mishnah will lay out sort of abstract ideas about how law should work. We have no evidence that rabbinic law was in effect so soon after the destruction of the temple, etc. By the time you get to somebody like Rabbi Zera, who's living in the 3rd century, who's born in the land of Israel, but finds his way to Babylonia, by the 200s and the 300s, it does seem that the rabbinic class is being asked to adjudicate disputes. Whether all Jews do this or only a subset of Jews in Babylonia, there's no way to know. But it seems that among the functions of the rabbinic class, especially in Babylonia, is to decide these kinds of cases. And it wasn't because the government gave them authority to do so, but seemingly the population themselves saw the rabbinic class as the address to go and get your questions answered. Think of it sort of the way arbitration might work. Okay. All right. So Rabbi Zera, yeah.
If Lisa. if they had gone to the government for adjudication, it's not a Jewish government.
Correct. The Persian Zoroastrian government. That's right.
So one would feel more comfortable within one's own community.
Probably. And it does seem that similar things worked in Christian communities in the Persian Empire as well. The Christian communities were sort of self-judging communities. On the other hand, there seems to be a lot of overlap and a lot of influence in all of these legal systems. So they don't seem to be happening in a vacuum. And they do seem to influence one another. Mm-hmm. I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that could be part of it, but it could also be that by this period, rabbinic Judaism has really become what Judaism is, and that those who believe in it see the rabbis as the official leaders of the Jewish people. And I just want to sort of contrast that with the earlier period in which the rabbis are trying to make that claim. And from my perspective as putting on the rabbi hat for a moment, they were right? They did have the authoritative best practices of how to interpret the Torah or whatever. But from a political aspect, it seems that there were plenty of non-rabbinic Jews out there, and that the rabbis were vying for control with other people and other modes of thinking, and that by the Talmudic period, it seems like rabbinic Judaism has really taken off and is the official, is normative Judaism, if we could even talk about something like that.
Got it.
Okay. So Rebbe Zera in this case says, aha, I know the answer, right? Presumably this is something that happened in Babylonia. Rebbe Zera says, I know what to do. This is exactly parallel to Rabbi Chia's case, right? If there were ever a time to apply Rabbi Chia's principle, here it is. To which Amarle Abaye, his slightly younger student, says, Im ita mishtaba, right? What do you mean? If this law, if Rabbi Chia is correct, he should swear, v'hagazlanhu, okay? But he's a thief, right? And we all know that thieves can't be trusted. What's the point of making a known thief? And we know he's a thief because we now have witnesses testifying that he stole these cows and ate them, or sheep, or whatever they are. If he's a thief, why should we trust anything he says? Right? He's not an honest person. Why? How could we possibly impose an oath on somebody whom we don't trust? What good does that do? Amarle, shekenegdo ka'amina. I didn't mean that. I meant the other guy, his opponent ought to take an oath. And so this is bringing up a sort of interesting principle in rabbinic law. If one party who ought to take the oath, right, can't, for whatever reason, take the oath, it seems like under certain circumstances, we can switch the applicability of the oath to the other party. But of course, the deen would then be would then be different. So for instance, let's take the simple case of the modeh b'miktzat ta'ana case, right? Ruvain says to Shimon, you owe me $100. Shimon says back, I do owe you, but I only owe you 50. So in theory, Shimon should pay only the 50 and swear on the rest. But let's say that Shimon is a convicted thief, right? And he's just he's just completed his sentence, and he's a known thief. Well, we can't trust Shimon to take an oath on the rest. So in such a case, it would seem that Ruvain should take the oath. You really do owe me 100, and then collect the full 100. Okay, for whatever reason, the person who has to take the oath can't take the oath in order to get out of something, then the other party should take the oath, and he should have to, and Shimon should have to pay. So that seems to be the principle that Rabbi Zera is talking about. Now, this is a good example, I think, of, now, did Rabbi Zera, when he first, we had no indication that he really meant that the plaintiff should swear as opposed to the defendant. So it seems that Rabbi Zera has changed his tune a little bit, having been challenged forcefully for Abaye. We see something a great deal about rabbinic culture here, and that sort of the senior sage who has been shamed by the junior sage who has really gotten his number. You can see how sometimes the senior sage says, "Oh, well, that's not really what I meant. Really, I can answer your question and still claim that I said what I said." And in part, I think you see the battle of halachic argumentation doing a number on Rabbi Zera. So, okay. So, at this point, the Talmud weighs in, okay, and says, Hashtanami. Wait a second. Let's think about this case. Delete de Rebbe Chia, nichayeve mid Rav Nachman. Even if we weren't to apply Rebbe Chia, remember, it's Rebbe Chia, the application of Rebbe Chia's comparison is sort of an open question, okay? And what Rebbe Zera did by saying, "Hey, I have this means of applying Rebbe Chia." Now the Talmud is saying, well, forget about Rabbi Chia for a second. Even if we reject Rabbi Chia's first statement, we would still know the answer to this question, namely that he would still have to take an oath. Okay, that is to say, who would have to take an oath? The thieving shepherd would nonetheless have to take an oath. How so? Mid Rav Nachman. Okay. From what Rav Nachman says. Okay, and this is the case. The Mishnah says, Maneh li biadecha. Okay, you owe me $100. 100 of mine is in your hand. And the other one says, Ein lecha biadi. Ein lecha biadi. There is nothing of yours in my hand. Patur. He doesn't have to pay, and he doesn't have to take an oath. Okay, which is, of course, the principle that we've been dealing with the whole time, that if you have what we call kofer bakol, if you totally deny that you had anything to do with this, well, we have no witnesses, we have no reason to make an oath. Okay. However, v'amar Rav Nachman, mashpi'in oto shvuat heset. Nonetheless, we cause him to take a shvuat heset, okay, as this translation calls it, an oath of inducement, whatever that means. That is to say, even though midoraita, biblically speaking, he doesn't have to take an oath, well, the rabbis come along and say, well, we kind of do want you to take an oath. Okay, you don't have to pay. Okay, but the fact that someone has brought you to court and says you owe me the money, right? We think that that's serious enough that you should have to take a rabbinic oath. Okay. So, to which the Talmud says, no, that doesn't make any sense. The Rav Nachman takantahi, Rav Nachman made a takana. How do you translate takana? Legislated this. It comes from tikkun, right? To fix,
repair,
to update. Exactly right. And so a takana is a rabbinic pronouncement. Okay, so Rabbi, and this notion of, oh, well, but now he's a gazlan, right? He's a thief, and therefore he can't do it, so we should switch the case. So the other guy should have to take it. No. V'takanta l'takanta lo avdinan. A takana on top of a takana we do not do. And this is a very important rabbinic principle. That sort of, when we think about Pirkei Avot, right? That in the first chapter of Pirkei Avot, there's this thing that the Anshe Knesset Hagadolah say that, right? Asu siag la Torah. You're supposed to make a fence around the Torah, okay? But a fence around the fence is going too far, okay? So, for instance, cheeseburgers are forbidden according to the Torah. The rabbis are worried that you might at some point get confused between the lamb shawarma and the turkey shawarma, right? So lamb shawarma and yogurt sauce, the Torah says no. Turkey shawarma and the yogurt sauce, the Torah says bon appetit, right? No problem. The rabbis say, you might get confused, so we're going to prohibit turkey, okay? But vegan turkey with yogurt sauce, we're not going to prohibit. Because based on this principle, takanta l'takanta lo avdina. Okay, we're not gonna continue to legislate on legislation. Okay. All right. V'tepokle. So we haven't quite. Essentially, we've now rejected the notion that we would have, if it were not for Rabbi Chia, we could have learned this out from Rav Nachman. We've now rejected Rav Nachman, thereby rehabilitated the possibility that Rabbi Chia would teach this. Okay, so we're going to try it again. Okay. So v'tepukle dahavale ro'eh, but you could learn out from it because he is a shepherd. Okay. V'amar Rav Yehuda stam ro'eh pasul, and Rav Yehuda said in general a shepherd is pasul. Okay, that is to say, it wasn't because we have particular reason to suspect this shepherd, right? That we have witnesses that he stole. Doesn't matter. Even if we didn't have witnesses that he stole, this person, by virtue of his profession, is not the kind of person who can take an oath. And what Rav Yehuda is probably thinking is that every shepherd in the world, by virtue of being a shepherd, is a thief. Because that's what shepherds do. They take the flock that they're watching and go and graze them on grasslands that they don't own, thereby stealing the biomass of somebody else's food.
So, yeah. Rabbi, is Rabbi Yehuda, is this statement, is this Agadah or Halacha? And how do the two, and so are they sometimes mixed up, sometimes like this?
Very much so. Here, I think it's halacha. His claim, and remember, Rav Yehuda is before any of these guys. Rav Yehuda is a second generation Babylonian sage. So both Abaye and Rabbi Zera are limited to what or inherit Rav Yehuda's claim. I think your question is a good one. This little Aramaic story lit. We're not quite sure of its connection. Is this actually an event that the Talmud is describing in its own language for Rabbi Zera and Abaye to argue about? Is it something that happened in real life in the presence of Rabbi Zera and Abaye? We simply don't know. When it comes to Rav Yehuda and his claim of stam ro'eh pasul, in general, a shepherd is unfit to take an oath. I think this is halacha. He's simply giving you a piece of rabbinic culture that these are the kind of people you simply can't trust. I'm not sure we have. There are a couple of in the third chapter of Sanhedrin, there is a list of people who cannot be witnesses. And shepherds come up, also dice player, gamblers, right? And the question is exactly why can gamblers not be trusted? In part, it might be because they are, as it says, Eno osek b'yushuvo shel olam, that they're sort of not engaged in the community, right? Gambling is sort of an external kind of thing. But the other way of saying it is that they do asmachta, that they rely on something which is illogical, right? Because they know even if the statistics are not in your favor, right, you're going to bet on the number that is statistically unlikely to come in. Well, if the person who would make that kind of mental judgment is someone who I can't trust to be honest about what they saw. Okay, so that's maybe one thing. The other people who are forbidden from testimony are pigeon racers. Now, exactly what a pigeon racer is, it could be a pigeon racer, or it could be someone who does falconry, right? Who sends one bird to go and steal other birds, and is therefore, again, sort of involved in theft. And so in a lot of these cases, it's theft, right? The fact that I'm willing to play the numbers game to take your property, that's very close to stealing in the rabbinic imagination. So I guess they just feel that someone whose professional life is involved in stealing other people's money. I mean, I don't know if you guys get those phone calls about, your car warranty has expired. All right. I would say that, all right, that's what we have in the modern world, right? Someone whose whole job is to scam old people, right, who don't know any better, into buying a useless car warranty. Well, we're not going to, even if you claim you saw murder, we just don't trust you because you're clearly not a trustworthy person. And I think that's what Rav Yehuda is saying about the roeh, right? Okay. To which, right, that seems like a slam dunk. Well, we don't need Rebbe Chia. We could just use this of Rav Yehuda. That would be a better proof of Rebbe Zera's reimagined oath, causing someone to take an oath. But to which the Talmud says, Lo kashya, no, that's no problem. Ha didei, ha de alma. Okay, the case of Rav Yehuda is one where he feeds his own flock. Right, the normal shepherd is one who has his own sheep, and it would, instead of having to pay out of his own pocket to feed his sheep, grazes the sheep in somebody else's field. Okay, but our case is Hada Alma, when he's doing other people's business. Well, he doesn't have an incentive to do that. This is part of the deal. Okay, and therefore he's getting he can graze those sheep in the fields of their owners, right? It's just that the owners isn't available to watch over the sheep, and so he's hired, right? The dog walker, right? If you were to hire a dog walker to walk your dog on your own property, then nobody would care where the dog poops, right? It can poop on your own property, and it's no big deal. Okay, all right. And the ilote mahachi, for if you would not say that, how would it be possible in the abstract to ever give our sheep to anybody, right? If all shepherds are thieves, right? Then how would it be possible that we would even have shepherds, right? Hakativ v'lifnei iver lo titein michshol. Right? You can't place a stumbling block before the blind, right? If every Jew who were in theory ever to entrust her sheep to a roeh would just be, right, that person is a thief, then why would we ever put people in such a situation? Doesn't make any sense. Okay. And therefore, chazakah, we have a general principle, en adam choteh velo lo. This is another really crucial rabbinic principle, is that all things being equal, we assume that people don't sin unless they stand to gain from it. Okay? And that if the shepherd has nothing to gain by stealing, right, we assume that people, unless they're going to benefit from it monetarily, are going to do the right thing. And it's rare, I think, that we can have such a very clean, almost theological principle derived from the halacha. But I think this is a very profound statement on the human condition here, right? Unlike other religious traditions that feel that human beings are in a state of original sin, are essentially evil, and are inclined by virtue of their evil to do bad and need religion to make them good because otherwise they're bad. The rabbinic assumption is people are generally good, right? Yes, it's true. We have desires and we stand to gain. People don't live up to their values, but all things being equal, right? If people don't have anything to gain from it, we don't assume that they're going to do something wrong. Yeah, Dara.
I just want to say that, at least from what I've studied with you recently, it seems as if the Talmud assumes that if they have something to gain, it's afraid that they might trespass.
Yes, absolutely. And so maybe this is a little bit paradoxical, or we're trying to thread the needle carefully. But as we've seen before, this is Rabbi Yochanan's whole point about the oath that we're talking about. What's its purpose? What's going on with it, right? And it's precisely that, is that we realize that were it not for this oath, I could go around grabbing other people's taluses and saying mine, 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 and get half of it, right? I stand to gain a lot. And so you're right. We assume a kind of base goodness that if you have nothing to gain, we don't think that people are just going to be bad for the sake of being bad. But as you point out, we do assume that people are going to be bad, right, for the sake of making money. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that, then you could just continue arguing and think about, like, what is the minimum amount to gain that would cause a person to do these things.
Right. I think that's right. I mean, that's a sort of classic Talmudic question, and I think that's right. I suspect that the answer is going to be time and place dependent, right? It's going to depend on all kinds of things. What's the financial status of the potential sinner? How much do they stand to gain, right? How likely are they to get caught? What's the consequence for getting caught? Yeah, I totally agree. But I think that that's still a slightly different sort of stance vis-a-vis what it is to be a human being, to say that human beings, when tempted by money, are going to behave poorly, is still a little bit different from saying human beings are evil. And I think that distinction is sort of worth pointing out. Okay, so at the end of the day, with this story, it would seem like, having challenged from Rav Nachman and from Rav Yehuda, right, and having rejected them both, we have essentially resurrected Rabbi Zera's response to Abaye. And at the end of the day, after all of these pages, it seems like Rabbi Chia's first claim ultimately is accepted. Okay? And this does, in fact, seem to be the halacha, that if Reuven claims Shimon owes him $100, Shimon says, I don't owe you anything, but there are witnesses to the partial owing, that it works precisely like the modeh b'miktzat hatana, the partial admission of the claim, and that Shimon has to pay the 50 and swear on the rest. And the only thing that we've added here is that if for whatever reason, right, we don't trust Shimon to take the oath, then we're going to switch it around. Then Reuven takes the oath and Shimon has to pay. Okay. And so really what we've added is this little switcheroo here, to acknowledge, I think, something that many of you have been sort of asking about, is sort of what's the state of this oath? What good does it do? Why do we trust people? How efficacious is it? And it would seem like the Talmud thinks much of the time, or at least Rabbi Yochanan was convincing, at least to me, to say, well, if it weren't for this oath, then people would really behave badly, and therefore this oath is meaningful, at least to some degree, to get people to stay in line. And yet what the Talmud has now said is, but we acknowledge that it's not going to work for everybody, right? Some people are just not trustworthy, whether that's an individual thing or it's a professional thing or something like that. The system needs to respond to the claim of, but that guy's a thief. Why should we trust anything he says? Somebody who's willing to steal sheep is willing to say, I swear to God, I didn't steal a sheep. And therefore we have this potential much more powerful oath, which is that, okay, well then if the claimant says, I swear you really owe me from the thief, then the thief is gonna have to pay. And that is a kind of powerful tool in the rabbinic quiver to some degree. Okay. Questions?
So the not putting a stumbling block seems very powerful and important.
Yes. This is a good. It's a very powerful principle. You see a couple of things from it. First of all, and Maimonides, this is one of the most famous things in the Guide of the Perplexed. This is Maimonides' proof, sort of for Midrash, is that he thinks that the plain sense of V'lifnei iver lo titein michshol has nothing to do with blind people and nothing to do with stumbling blocks, right? That this is a good example of a metaphorical commandment. He thinks it is forbidden to on purpose trip a blind person, but he thinks that should be derived from a different pasuk, right? Forget exactly where it is. This one, right? V'lifnei iver lo titein michshol. Don't place a stumbling block before a blind person, is specifically means don't tempt someone to do something forbidden. And this is treated in the very first opening pages of Tractate Avodah Zarah. This is actually used as the proof text for the Mishnah there that says you're not allowed to trade with idolaters within a few days of their festivals. Why? Because if you get either you spend money on an object such that the shopkeeper made a good sale, right? Or you buy an object, or the other way around, you sell an object to the idol worshiper at a good deal, such that he bought something for a good deal, then this idol worshiper is liable to go and thank his deity. Thank you, Zeus, for helping me defraud the Jew, right? And because non-Jews are commanded not to practice idol worship, you have put a stumbling by giving an idol worshiper a good deal in business. You've placed a stumbling block before them such that they're going to go and thank their God, and that would be forbidden. So you can't do that. And similarly, you shouldn't put a cup of wine next to the Nazir. Right? The Nazir is someone who's taken the oath not to drink wine. So you don't say, yummy Cabernet, so delicious, I'm going to leave it right here, right? No, you don't tempt people to do things that are forbidden. Here it's being used in a slightly different sense, which is to say that if we really believe that all shepherds are thieves, then how could it be that the system would allow for us to transfer our sheep to shepherds, right? That is to say that the question is, who is the iver? Who is the blind? Is it the shepherd that we're giving because he is a thief, right? By us giving our sheep to him, we're sort of tempting him to sin? Or is it that we are the iver? We, by being that we're liable to get our stuff stolen by the thief, we wouldn't have a principle of allowing this to happen. There should be no shepherding in Judaism, because if shepherds are really thieves, then people are going to get their stuff stolen. So I think the Talmud here, and this is the anonymous voice of the Talmud, is pushing the metaphor even farther, right, and becomes used as this sort of metaphor. But it's good that you pointed out, because sort of among the things that the Talmud is willing to do is use biblical verses in a variety of different ways. It could be the source of the law, but here it could be a sort of more broad moral principle that can be invoked to explain why something must be or must not be part of the system. I'm trying to think of other places that it comes up. Yeah, that's basically. I'll tell you though, in the discussions about Zooming on Shabbat, I know this is a fraught topic in your community, right? But among the arguments made by people who think that Zooming should not happen on Shabbat, even for a good purpose, for tefillah, right, is precisely this kind of argument, which is, we all agree that buying something from Amazon is forbidden on Shabbat. Well, if you have Zoom in one tab, and that's okay, right? Am I not placing a stumbling block before the blind because, well, the rabbi just mentioned this book during the sermon, right? And once the services are over, well, I could just click one tab over and open an Amazon window and buy that book. Right? It's possible that what one has done by encouraging people to use their computers on Shabbat is to place a stumbling block before them that they're now going to go and do other things that they're not supposed to do, and therefore whoever led the Zoom service is placing a stumbling block before the blind, whether you buy it or not, right? Presumably, this is there must be limits to this as well. This is also traditionally the reason why people wouldn't invite people over to their house on Shabbat if they knew that they were going to violate Shabbat in doing so. Right? Now, if you know that people are going to drive somewhere else anyway, right? Anyway, this is one of the charges lobbied against Chabad by other ultra-Orthodox groups, by saying you're violating v'lifnei iver lo titei michshol when you invite all these non-observant Jews to come to your Shabbat dinner table, and you know full well they're going to drive there, right? You are placing a stumbling block before them by inviting them to dinner. Therefore, you're not, lifting the sparks of Judaism and doing outreach to Jews. You're violating the Torah by doing this kind of Jewish outreach. So, okay. Finally, nope, I lost my place. Yes, okay. Finally, we've finished the sort of opening overture of the tractate, and finally the Talmud quotes the second part of the Mishnah, okay, which is Zei yishava she'en lo ba pachut michetzia. Okay, the oath that each one grasping the talus has to swear is, I swear I have no less than half in it. Okay, and I've pointed out, I think probably more times than I needed to, how weird, right? Splitting the garment is not so interesting. It's the oath that's interesting, but this oath is fascinating, right? We have this very odd situation. Why does he swear he has no less than half? Right? Doesn't that contradict the claim of it's all mine? Shouldn't they each take an oath? I swear that it really is mine. Okay. What have we done when we impose an oath that's so different from the claim that each of them is making? Yeah, Dara.
It seems to me that they're allowing for the possibilities that we talked about earlier. It's possible that they both grabbed it at the same time. And there was that one possibility, and that's why we have to do this.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that's probably ultimately the answer. is that given that it's at least theoretically possible that they both got it at once, this is the fairest way to adjudicate it. And maybe I would say it differently, given that that theoretical possibility means that each of them really is only claiming half of it, even though they're saying it's all mine, I found it. But yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. So the Talmud will therefore ask, al di'itle mishtaba o al deleitle mishtaba? Literally, on having it is he swearing, or on not having it is he swearing? Right? Which part is he swearing on? Right? Is he swearing on the part that the half that one is grabbing, or is he swearing on the other half? Okay. Okay. So Amar Rav Huna, right? Rav Huna will answer this question. Now, again, historically, it's sort of like Jeopardy. Presumably, the Talmud has this statement of Rav Huna, excuse me, and invents a question to which Rav Huna will seem to be answering. Okay, and Rav Huna says, "Da Amar," what the person means is Shavua sheyesh li ba, right? It's an oath that I have a stake in it. Ve'ein li ba pachut michetzia, and my stake is no less than half, right? And therefore, my stake is no less than half. Is really, I'm saying it's all mine, right? But but my claim is that it's no less than half. Okay, it's from half to all, something like that. Okay. Okay. So that's interesting. And by the way, you can probably see the way that the Talmud has formulated the question, right? Al di'itle is simply the Aramaic of sheyeshli. Okay, and so you can see how the Talmud has built the question to which it wants Rav Huna to answer from Rav Huna's statement, right? So that's the game that it's playing. Okay. So okay. So the Talmud wants to attack this and say, well, what's this half of it's mine, right? Nema, he should say, Shvua shekula shali, let him take an oath. It's all mine, right? That would at least match the claim. Okay, to which we answer, that doesn't make any sense. Mi havinan lekula, would we ever give either one of them the whole thing? Okay, that doesn't make any sense. In other words, what it seems like the Talmud wants is that the oath should match the law, the deen, the result, not the initial claim. Okay, right? So it's not as if the oath is backing up the claim, because the claim is, I found it. It's all mine. I understand that's the claim. What the oath is doing is sort of making it okay that we divide it. Okay, because that's the way that each of them can say, well, my claim is no less than half. Therefore, since half is part of the oath that they both have to take, then that's what they'll get. Okay. Well, if that's true, the Talmud then says, why does it say she'ein li ba pachut michetzia? I have no less than half. That's a strange formulation. Nema shavua shechetzia sheli. Right? Why don't I just say, I swear that half of it is mine? Right? Just come out and say it. If that's what I'm going to get, ultimately I'm going to get half. Then say, fine, I swear that half of it is mine. To which the Talmud says, no, merale dibure. That would contradict his claim, because it's really honed in on it. Okay, so really what we need is a oath that matches the law, what he's actually going to get, that nonetheless doesn't contradict the original claim. Okay. And here we have it. The original claim is it's all mine, and I'm not ever backing off of that claim, but I swear that no less of it's mine. Sort of like when the when the company that polluted agrees to pay $10 billion, but admits no wrongdoing, right? Well, we all know that that's a little silly, right? That paying the, right, when whatever it was, Purdue Pharma had to pay out the big money because of the opioid thing. Well, right? It was their fault. Okay, but they admit no wrong, right? That part of the, it has to jibe to some degree with their original not guilty verdict or something like that. Okay. Okay. Great. So the Talmud will continue to challenge. Okay. Hashtanami merale ledibure, right? But this oath also contradicts their original claim, because no less than half, it really isn't the same thing as all mine. Okay. Right? De Amar kula sheli. But he says, uledivrechem, shavua sheyesh li ba ve'en li ba pachot michetzia. Okay, so essentially, what the oath is saying is, no, I claim that all of it's mine, but I acknowledge that you, the judges who are faced with this dilemma, right, and are adjudicating this, therefore, according to your opinion, right, I'll simply state that I'll take an oath that I have a stake in it and that my stake is no less than half. Okay. So you can see what the Talmud has done. This is a good example of the asking questions and giving answers, right? Essentially, the Talmud has given a perush to the meaning of the oath. It has noted the odd formulation, right? Number one, it doesn't match the claim, right? But it also doesn't evenly match the deen, the result. It sort of splits the difference. And the Talmud, by means of asking these questions and giving these answers, is pointing out, well, that's the whole point of this oath. It's to sort of move the claimants from their initial claim to the point where they're going to be satisfied with the legal result. Okay. But there's sort of one final question, and this we've seen a little bit before. Okay. Given that each one stands literally grasping and standing, right? They're literally in the court holding onto the garment. Shavua lamali. Shavua zo lama. Why do we need an oath at all? Right? Who cares that I claim I have no less than half and you claim that? What are we talking about? Why do we need this? Right? Since they're both standing there, grabbing it. And now we have to bring Rabbi Yochanan again, right? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shavua zo takanat hachamim. It's a rabbinic oath. It's not a biblical oath. It's not built into the legal process. Shelo yehei kol echad ve'echad holech, such that not everyone will go v'tokef b'talito shel chavero, and grab his buddy's talis. That's a silly translation. Grab the garment of another person. V'omer shalihu. Right? It's exactly what Dara was pointing us to before, is that Rabbi Yochanan's a pessimist about human nature, right? Everybody, it's all well and good to say that people don't behave badly if they don't have anything to benefit, but in a world of private property, we all have something to benefit from stealing other people's stuff. And this situation is an impossible one. If I could steal anybody else's t-shirt and say, it's mine, 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 and then we split, then there's nothing to prevent widespread lying about private property. And at least the oath, if everybody has to take an oath, and you don't just get half the t-shirt, you only get the half the t-shirt after swearing to God that no less than half of it's yours, well, that's enough of a deterrent that people wouldn't go around and do this. Okay. However, right, realizing what we realized in the previous sugya, right? In the same way, remember that the roeh, the shepherd, by virtue of his being a shepherd, / by virtue of having testified against him that he stole those sheep, this person is a problematic person. Well, if Rabbi Yochanan's right, that essentially we're suspicious of everybody deep down really wanting to grab somebody else's garment, well, then how can we trust anybody? Right? If Rabbi Yochanan's right about human nature, then we're all suspicious of, we're all thieves deep down. All right, maybe this is a good, we could have taught this on Shavuot evening, right? And thinking about the lo tachmod, right? In the 10 Commandments about not coveting, whatever that means, which is of course very strange given that usually the Torah doesn't command emotions. How can you command emotion? And don't tell me v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, or v'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha, love the Lord your God. That's not what love means for Deuteronomy. To love in Deuteronomy, a great book by John Levinson, came out not that long ago, called The Love of God, which is of course a double entendre. But love means to demonstrate fidelity through action, not to have a fuzzy, warm feeling in your gut. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind means perform the commandments. And v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha doesn't mean feel warm fuzzies for your neighbors. It means behave well towards your neighbor. If your neighbor is hurt, help them. If your neighbor's animal is stumbling, whatever, right? So it's behavior. And so maybe the lo tachmod, which really is maybe the only example of a commandment to not feel something, right, is related to this notion that sort of deep down we all do want to grab things that other people have. Okay, and therefore, if that's true, nema migo de chashida mamona chashida miyashvuata. Perhaps if someone is suspicious when it comes to money, which is of course everybody, according to Rabbi Yochanan, well then why should we trust anybody's oaths? If we believe about human beings that they would go grab anybody else's talus and say it's mine, it's mine, it's mine, what good does making them take an oath do? Right? If you're willing to grab somebody else's garment, you're not willing to lie about God. Okay? To which the Talmud says, "Lo amrinan migod chashida mamona chashida shvua." No, it's not true. Just because we suspect you of not being true about money does not mean that we don't trust you about an oath. Okay, why? If we were not to say this, how could it possibly be that according to the Torah, one who has a partial admission of the claim should take the oath, right? And so we've sort of come full circle here, right? That case is really lying behind everything. It's that case which sort of provides the whole rubric under which the oath makes sense. Well, we don't know exactly why it is the Torah says this, and to be honest, the Torah doesn't actually say this, but what the biblical law is, according to the rabbis, is that this very person who is indeed suspected about not being honest about money matters is nonetheless trusted to take an oath. And I think the rabbis are aware very clearly about sort of what money does to human beings, and that people are desirous of it in this basic way. And yet, it doesn't mean that people would be so brazen to nonetheless say, I swear to God, etc. Yeah, Tara.
So it's like the oath is the justification for itself.
Yes. It's a little bit tautological. But if you are starting from the premise that the Torah is always right, and you've derived this notion of the modeh b'miktzat ta'ana case, the partial admission of the claim, well, then everything is going to have to sync up with that theory. I think maybe what you're getting at, and I think we've talked about it a little bit before, is that how seriously do we think people take oaths, and why? I don't know, in our context, I mean, certainly we do have elevated speech, testimony, right? Perjury and lying are not the same thing in American law. We have all kinds of rituals around testimony, raising your hand and putting your hand on the Bible, and all these kinds of ritual things that sort of make it more serious. And we have legal penalties for lying and things like that. And yet, to some degree, what's to prevent someone from lying under oath? What's to prevent, right? But somehow there is even in our society some sort of sense that doing a very particular kind of speech act is to some degree a deterrent, and that some people, many people, most people even, are not willing to stand up in front of everybody and say I swear to God, and then say something which they know not to be true. So I propose that we pause there and pick it up next week. I want everyone to sort of keep in mind at what point you want to transition away from some of this stuff. It's not Shavuos, right? It's crazy to think that the summer is here, right? But it's not so long until we should all be starting to prepare for the Yamim Noraim again. And so maybe we need to go back to Yoma, or maybe we should go back to Rosh Hashanah, or things like that. So I'd love to come to a little bit of a sort of ending in some of the Bava Metzia stuff, but keep it open in terms of what else you want to move to after we do that.
I think we really came to a pretty profound place though with this.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we've talked a little bit about Levinas, but he's always pushing that the doctors of the Talmud are always talking about a bigger issue. And you really named it. How do we base our society? How do we look at each other? How do we treat the other? That's all of his themes. And it really came out, but I would have completely missed it had you not
No,
been able to
I think that's right.
this.
And I do think this is something that's, I mean, I don't know why I was fighting with my son about this, because something we were learning over Shavuot, he was really sort of doubling down on the particulars of the case. And I kept saying, Mayor, forget about the case. That's not the point. The point is they constructed the case not because it actually happened that way, or that, he was saying, well, that guy was so stupid. Why did he say that? He should have said this other thing. And I kept saying, but that's not the point. The point is not that this happened, or that the person in it was or wasn't stupid. Is that the rabbis made this case because it helped them think about an abstract principle. We in the West are so used to talking about abstract principles as abstract. What does it mean to be fair? What is fairness? What is the human condition? Well, the rabbis didn't think that way, or if they thought that way, they expressed those ideas not in the abstract formulation, but in case law, right? Giving a case about a fair person, or giving a case about an unfair person, or giving a case about which it's confusing. And I think that's very much, they don't come out and say it. Human beings are bad, and therefore they need rules to keep them in line. They come up with cases such that we can say, the rabbis instituted a particular kind of takana in order to address this aspect of human nature, or something like that.
But I think they're also talking about what's worth arguing about.
Yes.
What's worth our focus of our time and our energy. And, it really is an interesting, I have to think about it. I had no idea we were headed here. I'm just a little dense. So anyway.
No. Good. Well.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And I'll see you next week.
Thanks, Dr. Bickart. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you
Bye.
again.
Bye-bye.